On Monday the 23rd of August 2010, PC John Gallagher of the Metropolitan Police made his way to an address in Pimlico, London, an affluent area of the city known for its elegant architecture and charming Victorian homes. It's roughly 4:40 p.m, and Gallagher meets the letting agent at the entrance of 36 Alderney Street, a converted townhouse that now serves as a block of rented apartments. The letting agent opens the door and they make their way to flat 4 at the top of the building. Gallagher had been called out to check on the well-being of the tenant, Gareth Williams, who was reported missing by a work colleague earlier that day, claiming he had been absent without leave for over a week. The problem, however, is that this person isn't just your average Londoner. Williams is a codebreaker who works for MI6, the UK Secret Intelligence Service, and therefore his absence is concerning not just from a personal standpoint, but from a national security front as well. The letting agent unlocks the door and waits outside, as PC Gallagher enters the apartment. At first glance, the home looks relatively tidy, and there seems to be nothing untoward or suspicious inside. Yet as Gallagher looks deeper, he notices a few anomalies. A woman's wig hangs from a chair. A factory reset phone surrounded by several SIM cards lay on the table, and an intense heat emanating from the radiators, despite it being a reasonably warm summer's day. Making his way upstairs, Gallagher would inspect the floor, eventually reaching the ensuite bathroom, where he would find a peculiar item occupying the bathtub. A bulging, bold red duffel bag was squeezed into the space, with a small Yale padlock ominously closing the two zips together. He attempted to lift the bag to inspect it closer, before realising that its contents held a significant weight. As it rose from the porcelain, a sinister smell began to pervade the air, whilst a scarlet red liquid began seeping from the base of the holdall. After calling HQ for assistance, police would eventually cut open the bag to reveal the naked, deceased body of Gareth Williams, sparking international intrigue and an emergency investigation into what led to this bizarre and deadly set of circumstances. Gareth Williams was born in Anglesey, Wales in the late 70s, and from a young age, he was said to be gifted with exceptional intelligence. Described by his old school teachers as a maths genius and the pupil with the fastest brain they'd ever met, Williams was passing GCSE and A-level maths exams at the early ages of 10 and 13, eventually graduating with a university degree in the subject before he had even reached adulthood. He would go on to study a PhD and take advanced maths at St Catherine's College, Cambridge, and as his remarkable abilities garnered a reputation, he would soon be headhunted by GCHQ, the UK's intelligence and cybersecurity agency. During his time there as a communications officer, Williams was able to apply his unique talents to help defend the country against various forms of cyber threats and terrorist plots, one of which was known as the Liquid Bomb Plot, a campaign by a group of radicals who were planning to detonate homemade explosives on planes, disguising the bombs as soft drinks. Williams was heavily involved in foiling this terror attack and eventually worked his way up the ranks at GCHQ before taking on a secondment as a codebreaker at MI6. It would be here that Williams would dip his toe much further into the world of international espionage, rubbing shoulders with secret agents and spies on highly confidential cases. A far cry from his usual work as a desk-bound technician in Cheltenham. Williams rented the apartment in Pimlico due to its close proximity to his new workplace, with it being only a few hundred yards away from MI6 headquarters. Family mentioned he never spoke about his job, whilst neighbours would state how they would rarely see Williams with his curtains and windows almost always closed. He was unmarried, an avid cyclist who was heavily invested in fitness, and considered an incredibly private, introverted individual. People who knew him locally suggested he had no close friends other than his sister, and no love interests whilst living in London. Williams's death has been widely debated over the years, with many parts of the 31-year-old's personal and professional life being highly scrutinised to try and bring his story to a satisfying conclusion. Let's take a deep dive into this case and assess all the evidence, accounts, and possible theories as to what led to his fate, starting with the forensics at the crime scene. Upon his discovery, Williams's body was described as being in an advanced state of decay, suggesting he could have been decomposing in the tub for almost a fortnight before he was eventually found. Williams, who measured roughly 5'7", was supposedly so contorted in the holdall that officers initially thought that his arms and legs had been dismembered to allow everything to fit inside. In the bag with Williams was the key to the padlock which had secured the zips together, despite the lock being fastened on the outside. There were also no other items inside the bag that would have helped Williams escape, such as a knife or scissors. There were seemingly no signs of a struggle, with no scratch marks from within, and no significant bruising on his body from attempting to escape. Pathologists would later determine that there were slight grazes on Williams's arm, which could have been caused by attempts to get out of the bag, yet nothing conclusive to suggest that as fact. There was no evidence that Williams had been stabbed, choked, or bludgeoned, and no signs of any drugs or alcohol in his system. Further forensic analysis tested for over 100 different poisonous substances, all of which came back negative, yet some may have evaded detection due to the body's decayed state. There were also small traces of DNA belonging to two separate individuals found on the zips and lock, but the identity of these individuals was inconclusive. As for the rest of the apartment, there were no major signs of a disturbance, with the flat being described as relatively tidy and no evidence of any theft or burglary taking place. Outside the ensuite, in the main bedroom, the only irregularity was the duvet to the bed left strewn on the floor. The second bedroom was host to another North Face duffel bag, but more surprisingly, the wardrobe contained over £15,000 worth of women's designer clothing, including 6 unopened boxes of unworn attire. Downstairs, a green towel from the bathroom was found on the kitchen floor, containing DNA from an unidentified person, whilst in the lounge, police found women's makeup along with the red-headed wig. Other than the smartphone and SIM cards, an unusual newspaper cutting titled "The Top 5 Regrets of the Die-In" was found on the table amongst various letters and envelopes. There were no signs of forced entry into the flat and no broken windows, but the front door had been double locked from the outside with a key, something which wasn't possible to do from the inside due to the nature of the lock. Lastly, as previously mentioned, the radiators in the home were turned up to a significantly high heat, despite average daytime temperatures being relatively warm at around 20 degrees Celsius that month. Whilst it's unclear at this point what the circumstances were that led to Williams's fate, many initially believed that this was a clear-cut case of murder, based on the evidence at the crime scene alone. Even if you were to put aside all the other strange oddities at the address, the manner in which Williams's body was found was enough to conclude that this was the work of somebody else. Add this to the fact that his work involved espionage, theories of a James Bond-esque assassination began to look less like a work of fiction and more like a grim reality. With no obvious suspects or murder weapons present, Williams's body was taken away for further tests, and as they awaited post-mortem results, the Metropolitan Police, MI6, and even the FBI all came together to try and piece together what they could to build a timeline of events leading up to his death. The earliest date that Williams's movement could be traced back to was Wednesday the 11th of August, when he would return to London from a trip to the USA. It's unclear whether this was for business or leisure, but it was later discovered that Williams had been tasked, along with other intelligence officers, to infiltrate and report on hacking networks in the US and UK, so it may have been related to this activity. Various CCTV images were able to capture Williams a few days later on Saturday the 14th, where he was seen pictured at Holland Park tube station, and again captured on camera shopping on Brompton Road the following day. At 2:30 p.m, he was seen outside Harrods department store in Hans Crescent before heading towards Sloane Street near Dolce & Gabbana. This was the last confirmed sighting of Williams alive. It's at this point in the timeline where Williams's whereabouts are unknown, as he wouldn't turn up for work on Monday the 16th and wouldn't be reported missing until a week later on Monday the 23rd. However, whilst the CCTV footage from Sunday the 15th is the last confirmed sighting, it isn't the last reported sighting, as various eyewitnesses believe they saw Williams in the days prior to his discovery. At some point in the week of the 16th, a man matching Williams's description was spotted by staff of a local patisserie on consecutive days, spending several hours at the rear of the cafe, working on a laptop. During his stay, he would be frequented by various visitors who would sit and speak with him before leaving. It's unconfirmed whether or not this was Williams, yet baristas were convinced that it was. A final sighting was on Thursday the 19th, when he was suspected of visiting a drag cabaret show in the city. Whilst this report was also unconfirmed, Williams did have tickets to 2 more future shows in his apartment. Initial post-mortem results on the cause of death would come back in the space of a few days. Outcome? Inconclusive. Despite not finding any signs of trauma, injury, or poisoning, most experts eventually concluded that Williams was likely alive and even possibly conscious when entering the bag, and that the act of being trapped inside the thick canvas itself was what may have led to his demise. Within 3 minutes of the zip being locked, temperatures inside would have reached over 30 degrees Celsius, and as oxygen quickly depleted and carbon dioxide built up, Williams would have soon passed out and suffocated in the space of half an hour. Due to the absence of injuries and seemingly little attempt to escape from the bag, attention turned to whether or not Williams may have actually done this to himself, either in an effort to end his own life, or perhaps as a form of experimentation. It's at this point where the case takes an even darker turn, as rumours surrounding Williams's sexuality and sexual preferences began to circulate in the press, with speculation that it may have been a leading factor into how he died. According to reports, evidence of S&M paraphernalia, as well as Class A drugs and male escort usage, had been found at the property, all of which were seemingly proven to be fabricated. Police did confirm, however, that searches for bondage and sadomasochism did exist on Williams's internet browser history, and when pieced together with the wig, the women's clothing, and interest in drag shows, they concluded that the spy was a secret transvestite homosexual who could have been attempting a form of erotic asphyxiation. Whilst it's true that Williams had an interest in drag and had previously visited gay bars in the city, it seemed quite the stretch that somehow his sexual preferences were the reason for his fate, especially as they had no proof of any of Williams's previous encounters. They did, however, have a reason to believe that he had an interest in bondage, as confirmed by his previous landlady. She recalled how Williams was once heard calling for help from his bedroom, and upon entering the room, she found him tied to his bed whilst half naked, in what was presumed to be a sexually motivated act. According to a statement, he claimed that he just wanted to see if he could get himself free, possibly in an attempt to spare his blushes for the real reason behind the act. Police believed that this was the reason behind the various female assaultments at the property, and provided an explanation for the shopping trip the week prior, where Williams most likely bought the expensive designer clothing. There were even suggestions that the clothes were in his size. However, there was also another potential explanation for this anomaly. It later became known that Williams had attended 2 fashion design courses in 2009 and 2010, and 2 women who ran the classes confirmed his attendance. Shop assistants were also questioned, and they claimed that Williams regularly told them that the clothes were for his girlfriend. His sister also told an inquest that she believed he was straight, and that he would have shared with her if he wasn't. Despite all of this conjecture, none of this was able to explain an even bigger question: if it was true that he did this to himself. How did Williams lock the bag? We know from his previous landlady's account that Williams supposedly enjoyed escapology, yet whether or not this was true is up for debate. If he were to attempt something so daring and life-threatening, even for a thrill, surely a man as smart and risk-averse as him would have a failsafe in place. Also, the fact that Williams's body was so heavily contorted inside the duffel bag leans more towards the idea that this wasn't of his own making. Lastly, with no way of being able to access the lock from within, it seems that the likely solution is that someone placed Williams and the key in the bag before trapping him inside. In fact, in an effort to prove this further, 2 forensic experts of similar build to Williams attempted to recreate the circumstances to see if it would be possible to lock oneself in a bag, and failed to do so even once despite over 300 attempts, claiming that even Houdini would have struggled. What doesn't make sense here though is the lack of evidence that Williams attempted to fight back or escape if he truly was being forced into the bag, with no signs of an altercation. One of the pathologists found slight grazing and bruising on the body, but believed that these were inconsistent with a struggle and possibly unrelated. Yet another believed the grazes were caused by Williams attempting to break free. It's possible that Williams was drugged or poisoned, as some substances, such as cyanide, chloroform and anaesthetic, would not have been detectable when carrying out the post-mortem. Another possibility is that he was held at gunpoint and told to get into the bag or face the consequences. Williams also could not have gotten into the bag unaided without leaving fingers and footprints around the scene, yet somehow there were none, leading to suggestions that they were wiped after the deed had been done. Despite all the possible scenarios that may have played out, the 3 pathologists who conducted the post-mortem examinations were unable to reach a conclusion on how Williams died, but stated that, on the balance of probabilities, he was probably unlawfully killed. As for who done it, well, that was the mystery. There seemed to be no obvious suspects or leads initially. However, a few months into the investigation, police released an e-fit of a couple who they believed could have been involved in the case. Thought to be in their 20s, the mystery pair was said to have a Mediterranean appearance, with police seeking their whereabouts after confirming they had visited Williams at his home in Alderney Street in the months leading up to his death. After being let into the building by a tenant in late June, the pair explained that they had keys to Williams's apartment and were there to visit someone called Pier Paolo. Upon making their way upstairs to the top floor flat, they were never seen again. It's unclear whether Pier Paolo was a real person, or perhaps a codename that Williams was using to disguise his identity, which wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility considering his work. It was also completely out of his character to trust anyone else with a key to his apartment, according to his close family members. Regardless, after no new information came forward on the couple, detectives eventually conceded that they may never be traced, and gave up their search for the mystery duo. An inquest into Williams's death took place in the following months, where coroners, experts and witnesses provided statements and testimony to come to a conclusion. However, it's at this point where the case gets even stranger still, as the many failures of his employer, as well as parts of the investigation itself, begin to unfold an even deeper conspiracy. Over 40 officers working for the intelligence services were interviewed, including various co-workers at MI6 and GCHQ. But one unanswered question in particular stood out from the others. Williams was due to work on Monday the 16th of August, yet failed to show up after going AWOL for the entire week. In that time, he missed 3 key meetings where his absence would have been noticed, and yet no alarm was raised by colleagues or his manager. It was only when his sister called his workplace, concerned of his whereabouts, that they would take a form of action and notify him missing. Stranger still, Williams' sister called his work at 11:30 AM, yet it took 5 hours for colleagues to then call the police and request a visit of his home in Pimlico. Also, Williams' address was only a stone's throw away from MI6 headquarters, meaning anyone could have quickly gone to check on his well-being. When questioned on the failure to report his absence, Williams' line manager, known only as Witness G, claimed that he thought the spy was simply stuck on a train, and that, in hindsight, knowing what I know now, should I have taken action? Absolutely. From just that sentence alone, many were suspicious of a possible cover-up taking place, yet unexplainable incompetence and derelicts of duty would not end there. DNA found on Williams' hand at the crime scene was originally considered a potential lead, but upon reviewing the evidence, it was discovered that it was instead belonging to one of the forensic officers, after an administrative error labelled the sample incorrectly. Forensics were unable to examine the front door to the apartment, as it had been inexplicably removed from the frame, along with the lock, where vital evidence could have been found. Lastly, the inquest learned only 2 days before its conclusion that 9 USB memory sticks were found at Williams' office and were being held by MI6, who merely apologised for the error. Outside the hearing, the lawyer and family of Gareth Williams claimed that his murder could have only been performed by someone who specialised in the dark arts of the Secret Services. Yet 3 years later, despite the inquest concluding the contrary, the Met Police concluded from their own findings that Williams instead was most likely alone when he died, and that it was nothing more than a tragic accident, believing he lowered himself into the holdall without touching the rim of the bath, secured the padlock from the inside of the bag, and quietly passed away. Oh, and not forgetting that he double locked himself in from the outside of his top floor apartment. So, if it truly was homicide, who murdered Gareth Williams? Well, there is one leading theory. Around the time of Williams' death, a network of around 14 other suspected assassinations of intelligence agents or Russian defectors had occurred in Great Britain. One of the most well-known of these victims was Alexander Litvinenko, a former KGB agent who fled to the UK after alleging corruption against the Kremlin. Litvinenko died from high levels of radioactive polonium poisoning, with 2 Russian agents suspected culpable by administering the toxin in his tea, causing a slow and painful death. Between 2003 to 2016, various other individuals have been suspected as being potentially taken out by Russian spies, with Williams being included in that list. Whilst it's not proven one way or the other, it's believed that Williams had been operating on cases involving Russian interference, specifically at how Moscow-based mafia cells laundered money around the globe. It certainly wouldn't be outside the realms of possibility, given his position in the Secret Service, and it may just be that Williams knew a little too much and was considered a significant threat by the Russian state. Consider the theory that, perhaps after returning from shopping that Sunday evening, Williams was blindsided by a pair of Russian agents at gunpoint who coerced him into his flat. Entering the premises without breaking in, they would interrogate him on what he knew regarding their illicit racketeering, force him to wipe his phone, before deciding that ultimately he knew too much. After drugging or poisoning Williams with an untraceable substance, they would set up the bag in the bath and lower him in gently, ensuring not to cause any injuries to make it look as though he was taking his own life. After throwing the key inside and locking the zips together, they would scrub down any evidence of their existence and stage the home in such a way to cause enough confusion to throw off scent from their trail. The various clues scattered around the apartment could all have been planted to give the impression that Williams was either depressed or had taken an erotic experiment one step too far. They would then crank up the heating in the home to accelerate the decomposition process, before double locking the door behind them and disappearing into the darkness. "15 years on, full closure on what truly happened to Gareth Williams on that sunny summer day in Pimlico remains elusive. The very nature of his secretive work implies that the complete truth may be forever hidden behind layers of confidentiality. And whilst that leaves many frustrated and disappointed, it's key that we remember that, at the end of the day, there was a tragic victim involved in this story. Rather than letting sensationalism obscure his legacy, we must honour Gareth for the remarkable individual that he was. A boy genius with a magnificent mind, a devoted brother and son, and a hard-working contributor to defending his country. His achievements and accomplishments in life stand in stark contrast to the distorted impressions portrayed in his death. In a city scarred by unresolved puzzles, few mysteries are as intricate or as peculiar as this one. As we reflect on Gareth's death, let us remember him not for the unanswered questions or the shadows of controversy, but for the inspiring man we know he was, praying that one day his story will come to a satisfying conclusion.